Morning, everyone. We have a few that haven't joined us yet, but we do have a quorum, so we're going to call the meeting to order. And I'll start with our audio and video recording notice. Board members, staff, guests, members of the public are reminded that the full authority board meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the full authority and or the KCCA board of directors. The recorded video of the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of the meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes. I should have checked that before, so thank you. All right, any declarations of pecuniary interest?
For the
Closed session item? Okay.
Not a declaration, Madam Chair, but there is a matter arising through personnel that I would like to discuss in closed session, and it has to do with identifiable people.
We can add that to that agenda. Our delegations this morning, so our minutes from our June 27th meeting, which were sent out in advance. We can move our second for the minutes. Steve and Ralph. I can see this. I can see. I'm far enough back. I'm not going to confuse Ralph and Ian. I know. It was the arm glass on the side of my glasses. It kept throwing me off. So questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none on the motion, then all in favor. And that is carried. All right, we'll jump right into our project tracking report for July and August.
So, Madam Chair, for the media report, I actually had Marianne take out some of her Facebook and Twitter feeds that she had included in the package because we were already at a pretty hefty package. So I'd encourage you, just there was a lot going on between the last meeting and this one. Specifically, lots going on our Twitter and Facebook feed, just lots of great events out in the campgrounds. Just some highlights, the Tall Tales Fishing Derby was well attended, and this year we were, a northern pike was actually caught in the lake, so that was some great excitement out there, and that's just a small shot of it as well. There is also a Learn to Fish program that was set up this year at the Dalewood Conservation Area. Again, well attended and a great program that was put on by ministry staff in coordination with our staff. So kids coming out, learning how to tie appropriate fishing knots, how to use fishing gear. And just for those of you who don't know, we have fishing gear loan programs in both our campgrounds. So children of all ages can go to the gatehouses and loan a fishing pole and a tackle box and go out and fish for the day. So another great opportunity to get out and enjoy nature. I'll skip ahead to some of the project tracking as well. The Environmental Youth Course has been a great initiative this year. With those youth getting involved in a number of projects. There's trail maintenance conducted as well as invasive species removed at Dan Patterson. And they'll be wrapping up their program towards the end of summer, helping out with some of the, again on the Dalewood Trail project as well.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from anyone? Okay. A motion to receive for information. Marcel, Max, all in favor? That's carried. Our water conditions report. Jen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was pretty dry between June and August, although we did get some pretty intense short rainstorms, which did keep our rain values high, but the flows in the river are still pretty low just because the water is running off the land and right into the river and reacting pretty quickly, so it just goes up and down really fast. Eastern Ontario is definitely showing the lowest conditions again, same as the last couple of years. However, a good point for this year as well is that we got some more funding for doing drain classification work. $8,800 to continue that project. That's our third year in a row, so it's pretty exciting.
motion to receive for report? Steve? And Bill? You're gonna get your, no, you're gonna get your names in the minutes no matter what, so, all right, all in favor? That's carried. Next up. Oh, yes.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if you remember from the last meeting, we brought to your report on the Dalewood Reservoir Trail project, which you approved, contingent on us coming back with further quotes on the parking lot and excavation work that needed to be done. Staff have tried their best to get quotes on this project. It involves excavating the driveway, putting granular material down, as well as fixing and reshaping the existing pathway down to the old Cars Bridge and fixing a void down there. You can see on the screen in front of you the contractors that have been contacted by staff: Stride Trucking, Robinson Contracting, Lamers, McMillan, and Marks. And this has been a process that's been ongoing for some months. Scott was able to get quotes from Stride Trucking for $16,500, and Robinson Contracting came in at $14,000. Both of those quotes are in addition to HST. The remaining three companies failed to submit for quotes despite numerous attempts by staff. Lamers and McMillan, there was simply no response, and Mark's Excavating did note that they were too busy. So it would be my suggestion that we accept the quote and move forward with the project with Robinson Contracting.
We got questions or comments?
I'll
Move it. Or second? Stephen, questions or comments?
Question.
Yeah.
What was the budget?
13.
Marcel?
Through you, Madam Chair, does that mean we have to identify other sources of funding to do the project?
No, we're in terms of the budget that was presented to you last month, with the funding that it already secured, we were looking at bringing over $24,000 from the capital reserve to cover off that. That was below the budget of $34,000 that we had budgeted to bring over.
If there's no further questions on the motion, then all in favor? That's carried. This brings us to our statement of revenues and expenses.
Madam Chair, so the statements were forwarded out in the advanced package. As you can see, everything is on track. Campground's performing well, especially when you're considering you're just looking at the statements for the end of June. And the busy July and August months are yet to be seen on those statements. So we're well on track for another good year.
Okay. Questions or comments? We had a motion to receive it. Ian? Ralph? All in favor? That's carried. Correspondence.
Madam Chair, I just have one item of correspondence to bring to the attention of members, and this is that we've been notified by the Township of Malahide that Councillor Max Moore will be celebrating 50 years as a council member this August, so that's a monumental accomplishment.
No wonder nobody's running against you. 50 years, that's a record. So I'd asked Elizabeth to have a look at our records too, and our records reveal Max has been a member on this board for 20 years, 21 years. And wow, in honor of the contributions to our watershed community, the authority is making arrangements to have a red oak tree planted in Max's honor. The red oak is known as one of the stateliest trees valued for its adaptability, usefulness, and hardiness, and all are fitting characteristics to honor Max. So we'll arrange that. We'll certainly make sure that your schedule that you're available to be there for the plantings. We'll get that all taken care of. Like I said, there's a reason nobody's running against you, right? 50 years, that's great. Okay, I think that was it for correspondence. Next, we've got our work plans. We've got our watershed management and environmental monitoring departments up first this year.
Madam Chair. One small thing, just to start off, you remember the eggs from June 4th. They hatched successfully with the help of our neighbors at Upper Thames with their incubators. We released 82 hatchlings back to Galewood Reservoir on Monday. That's very nice. And we still actually have another nest of snappers and some painteds that are cooking away in their little eggs, so they'll be released soon.
82, that's fantastic.
That was a 97% success rate for hatch. Sadly, only maybe one of those will make it to adult.
Yeah.
So we've given them a little bit of a head start, but it's not good odds. So for the 2018 season, we're continuing our collecting data for our long-term environmental monitoring programs. Those are things like surface water monitoring, groundwater, benthic sampling. I get a lot of calls every week about people asking me what kind of animal this is, and they send me a very grainy picture. So that is, I spend a lot of time doing that. One of my successes for this year, the completed watershed report card. That was a group effort with everyone at the authority. It was released on March 22nd, 2018, World Water Day. We're currently presenting the watershed report card to municipal councils. And some of you may have already had the pleasure of having that. It was pretty good. Next report card is scheduled for 2023, so we're working towards collecting that data for that, and hopefully we'll see some improvements. Ongoing is this DFO drain classification project. Municipal drains are classified into a number of categories to facilitate the review and approval of drain maintenance works with respect to fish and fish habitat. This is done under a class authorization process developed by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So there's a protocol that's followed that's based on science. To determine the classification of a drain, you have to know what species of fish are in it, and you also have to know what kind of flow is in that drain. Is it intermittent, is it continuous, or is it, those are the two. We've received funding for the last 3 years to do this work. We've electrofished 45 sites and collected fish data of those, as well as 62 sites where we've collected flow data. A lot of those, you get to a site and it's completely dry. Well, can't electrofish that. So, we will be continuing that work this month and doing some more sites as well. Looking forward to getting out there and IDing some fish. So to continue in 2019, I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue this work. It's very valuable information and data. It's useful for all the municipalities to have this updated information, what fish are in those creeks, what the flow is. And also the funding that we receive for that work can also be used to help support seasonal staff to help with in-water projects, benthic sampling, different things that take short amount of time this season. Another project in 2019 is working with the City of St. Thomas and the Lake Margaret Environmental Stewardship Committee to help with the development of their environmental monitoring program. If you recall, we collected data in 2016 on Lake Margaret, and that's valuable data and information that should be continued. 2020 and beyond. Something that would be really interesting to look towards in the future is that looking at how we're collecting our data and trying to see where we might have holes in that data set. What can we do to collect better data and use that data to make those informed decisions for environmental management? What are the watersheds in priority that are having growth and development and changes to land use and infrastructure over the next 5 years? Where can we focus our data gathering efforts to really make those informed decisions? And you have to build those long-term data sets. You need that information so you can make those decisions. And that's something that we also learned from the watershed report card. We know that there's holes in our data set as opposed for wetlands. We know that Dog Creek is we need to really focus in on that and find out where those those wetlands are. Something else that we can do is increase the number of sub-watersheds that we're reporting on. That will better target environmental monitoring and stewardship activities. That higher resolution provides a better understanding to that environmental variability in the watershed. And it's easier to identify and target those areas that need to be protected and or improved.
Any questions, Marcel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, thanks for the report. It's nice to see that we're trying to improve our watershed in many ways. Being a farmer, one concern that I see is reclassifying municipal drains. It can cause hardship to farmers. And so I would certainly hope that through the process of reclassifying drains, that we include municipalities and possibly the landowners, so that at the end of the day, they know what's going on and they're part of the process. They may not like everything that's being done, but at least I think they should be part of the process so that they're aware of what's going on and can somehow partake in providing information.
Madam Chair, to Marcel. The process is developed by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. It's a specific process that they provided to us. I'm following their program, but you definitely bring up a good point that you should be involved. But that information can be achieved through the DFO process. Like we can.
So follow up, if I may, through you, Madam Chair. I guess I agree. There's probably a process that they can follow after the fact, but I think there's a lot more appreciation if they understand the process and they're part of the process, or at least they're able to see the process happening. Because of the worst thing we can have is 5 years ago, a group of farmers were able to have that municipal drain cleaned out, but because of reclassification, no, we cannot do that. There's only certain periods of time, or there's all, because of habitat, whatever. So they can't do something that they've done before, and they need to be aware of what's happening.
Other questions or comments?
Just another quick comment. Jennifer, you mentioned DFO. How active is DFO now? I mean, they moved out of London. Are they still active in Ontario?
If I need DFO support, I can call the office in Burlington and usually get someone right away. There is a triage system that they have set up.
Okay.
And you're not talking about the dairy farmers in Ontario, right?
Okay, if there's no further comments or questions, can we get a motion to receive that for information? Bill and Dave, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Jen. It was great to see that post on social media with the eggs and the kids and the turtles and the kids, so that's great. Okay. Oh, Kettle Valley, yes, Kettle Valley Pioneer Agreement. Elizabeth.
So Madam Chair, there's basically two agreements that we needed to update with the Kettle Valley Pioneer. They're a long-standing organization that we've been working with for a number of years. They rent the space back at the Buck Barn, and as well as an annual basis rent out Dan Patterson. It was just this past weekend where they conducted their historical show. And they are the owners of the log cabin, water tower, and windmill down at Dan Patterson. So we have two agreements with them, one to rent out the Buck Barn, and the second one is to have them be able to have the historical structures down at Dan Patterson. If you can remember, there was some discussion at the board level before just about the upkeep of the cabin. Inevitably, if and when the Kettle Valley Pioneers disbanded, those historical artifacts would actually come into the possession of the authority as per pre-existing agreements. So it was important, I think, from this board, basically to make sure that there were some avenues within these newly established agreements where we could look at a work plan or have a plan in place in terms of the maintenance of those structures. So I was able to meet down on site with the Cattle Valley Pioneers. Scott and I went through each one of those structures that are existing down at Dan Patterson and had a look. The summary of that meeting is included in your packages as well. As you can see, basically we determined the structures are in good condition. This picture, basically, it's hard to see in the picture, but this is the veranda that faces Highbury. It's the veranda that's most in concern right now, mainly because we had a tree branch overhanging it. And so on the far right of the screen, you can kind of see that the shingles are a little darker in color, and that's because a large amount of debris was congregating there. Since that was identified over a year ago, that tree has been limbed and dirt and debris brushed off of the veranda, and now that's part of just an ongoing maintenance of the structure. But that is the veranda that the Cattle Valley Pioneers and when we went down there and looked at it, agreed that it probably needs to be replaced, and that's the most important thing. In regards to the structure, the shingles for the rest of the structure, there's actually asphalt shingles underneath those cedar shakes. So the urgency to recover the whole roof just is not there. They're more cosmetic than anything. And with the proper maintenance, making sure that debris is brushed off of them, I think there's some life left in them. In terms of the other structures, the water tower, again, is in good repair. It's wood. There's some just minor cosmetic things. We noticed that in grass cutting, we're damaging the baseboards. So there's some discussion about putting some stone or pavement stone around there so that we're not hitting the wood structure with cutting material. The windmill, again, is a good structure as well. I think I noted in the summary report that we might look at painting that in 3 to 4 years just to make sure it doesn't rust out. But otherwise things are in good shape. So basically the changes to the agreements, they remain the same. We did add in this new idea that we would meet on a regular basis to look at the maintenance of the structures and come up with a maintenance plan. As well, it noted that the Cattle Valley Pioneers are required to have $4 million in insurance. They have that. It was just updating the policy to recognize it. So it would be my recommendation that we proceed to execute those 2 agreements with the group.
Questions, comments? I'm glad to hear that we had a great discussion about that, I believe, at the trust meeting.
Yes.
About cedar shingles, and I'm glad to hear there's asphalt underneath them too. If there's no questions or comments, we need to move our seconder to Ian and Ralph. All in favor? That's carried. We won't ask how the discussions went. Okay, next up we've got our administrative office assessment RFP results.
Madam Chair, so the RFP was released on June 28th and closed on July 19th. We had a number of companies actually respond to it. I was pleased with the response. So we had 4 companies respond. And one firm, so in total the proposal was circulated to 7 firms directly by email, as well as posted on the Dingle and KCCA's website. 5 firms attended a mandatory site visit and 4 firms submitted bids. The submissions were reviewed and scored according to the evaluation criteria, and Wilson Diaz, architect, came out ahead and is recommended to negotiate a contract for this work project. Diaz was really the best combination of experience, project understanding, and pricing. And the firm has undertaken similar projects for 2 other local conservation authorities and demonstrated in their proposal a good understanding of the budgetary restrictions that CAs face. I will note that it's just slightly, the price was just slightly over the 10,000 that we have allotted for in the capital budget, but there's cost savings through other projects that I'm comfortable with that price.
Questions or comments? Okay.
And just one comment with, I'm sure other members sitting in other boards realize the cost of contracting and consulting and so on has gone up tremendously. And the fact that we've come in that close to the $10,000 budget is actually quite good compared to other projects that I've seen coming in recently. So I would fully support this.
You mover and seconder? So Max and Marcel, question?
Question as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. If staff can just remind me what the criteria, evaluation criteria was again, I'm not quite on that page right now. And I'm just, where I'm going is I just want to understand why we scored the lowest tender at 65.
So if you remember from the RFP, the pricing was included in a completely separate sealed envelope, and each of the companies were scored independently of the price, and they were independently scored on their business history and experience, past performance and references, compliance with the RFP, and demonstrated creativity as well as understanding of the project. So Wilson DIS may have scored lower on their price, but outscored the competitors in terms of those other categories.
Any further questions or comments? Not? All in favor? And that's carried. Great. Hill Creek Clean Water Initiative. Let's see.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one project for you to review today. It's a clean water diversion category, which we don't get very often. So that category funds projects that help reduce the amount of contaminated runoff through the diversion of clean rainwater or snow melt away from the source of contamination. This is a 100-acre organic CSA farm in the southern portion of our watershed. They grow vegetables, but also have some horses, pigs, cattle, and hens. And currently the runoff from the horse barn goes into 2 livestock yards. And so the landowner is looking to have eaves troughs installed on the barn and then underground tile installed to carry that clean rainwater away from the livestock yards and their manure pile. So the estimated project cost that they received was $1,800. So the grant request at 50% would be $900.
Ralph?
Question of interest, where does the underground tile deposit the water into? What's the nature of the structure?
So basically it's going to outlet just to where those dashed lines are to, there's a low area of ground that drains. It's kind of a sandy area there, so it will drain appropriately.
Any further questions, comments? Okay, get a motion to approve the grant request. Stephen? Bill? All in favor? That's carried. Okay. The proposed KCCA administrative bylaw. We're not looking to approve today. That's for September. Lots of reading, that's right.
I'm just going to go to the podium.
Yeah.
for this one. So I do apologize for the amount of paper in this month's agenda. And I'm going to try to give a brief overview of the proposed administrative bylaw that's up for consideration. So as you remember, there was an amendment to the Conservation Authorities Act in which a new administrative bylaw is a requirement for this authority to approve. And we need to have it in place before December 12th, 2018, according to the Act. Conservation Ontario actually took it upon themselves to work with a variety of representatives from across the province, as well as ministry staff, to look at best management practices in terms of governance, and developed a model bylaw that both met the requirements that the Act has set out, as well as, again, incorporating those best management practices from across the province. So the model bylaw developed by Conservation Ontario was endorsed by Conservation Ontario and circulated out to the CAs in order for them to use that bylaw as basically a template to introduce a new administrative bylaw. So what I've done is included that in your packages today. So you have both the template that I worked from that was provided by Conservation Ontario, and on page 71 of your package there's the checklist, which ensures that that is in compliance with section 19 of the Act, so that we know we're meeting all of the requirements of the Act. Then what was included was a summary of the proposed administrative bylaw. So I went down into basically each section of the CO bylaw where it left a blank for us to choose what we wanted to put in there. And I listed off what my recommendation was and where necessary reason for that. In a lot of instances where we were allowed basically to fill in a blank within the bylaw, I've chosen to fill it in terms of what our current practices already are. So I don't think that the new proposed bylaw is that much different from the practices that you've been used to here at the board. However, I do think there's a number of good things within the new bylaw that I know this board has been looking at initiating, and so I think it's a really positive step forward for good governance here at the authority. Just to highlight some of the more significant changes or proposals within the proposed bylaw. In terms of definitions, again, on communications from Conservation Ontario within the last couple of weeks, obviously you're aware that conservation authorities have been basically decreed out of the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we're now into a new Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. That transition is ongoing. Obviously, it complicated the draft bylaw in which it stated the Ministry of Natural Resources. So one of the workarounds to that was to put in a definition of what the definition of minister into the definitions, and this definition of minister replaces any reference where I may have been using Ministry of Natural Resources. So the new definition would just be minister responsible for administration of the Act. And so that covers us off from making any interim changes. Conservation Ontario, there was a slight wording change that I'm recommending from the model, and that's simply to reflect that the authority may appoint representatives to Conservation Ontario in accordance with the CO's bylaws. And again, the wording has just changed slightly so that we don't have to go back into the administrative bylaw if Conservation Ontario ever changed how representation on their board works. And again, noting that we will choose our representatives annually at the annual general meeting. Signing officers, again, this is in keeping with how we operate or have been operating with the authority to date, is that our signing officers are any two of the general manager or director of operations and the chair or the vice chair. One addition that I had put in there is that only one signing authority is required to authorize short-term contracts of less than 1 year, and financial transactions would be in accordance with the purchasing policy. So whatever is required in terms of approvals of purchasing, those signing authorities would be required in terms of the transactions as well. In terms of advisory committees, I think this is the most significant change that I'm asking the board to consider. Quite typically, we have operated with a nominating committee, so typically the chair, the vice chair, and the past chair would sit and ask for nominations, would review those, and come back with the board for the report. Lots of authorities have done away with that type of system and rather gone to just a full election system. Again, they'd be at the first meeting of the authority. So that would be my recommendation, that we get rid of the nominating committee. The Planning and Relations Committee has typically dealt with Section 28 concerns as well as any other programming concerns. Just the way that this board has worked over the last 4 years, and I think again a transition into a different model of governance, is that those issues are being brought to the full authority, and again an opportunity for the full board to participate in those discussions, which I think is a good move. And so I'm recommending again that we get rid of the Planning and Relations Committee and move those discussions to the full board. And finally, that the Personnel and Finance Committee would cease, but the responsibilities in terms of, especially in terms of hiring or firing, that those duties would be assigned to the Executive Committee. So the only committee that we would be looking at this time would be having the Executive Committee, and that committee would include the traditional duties that we've typically assigned to the Personnel and Finance Committee. So again, just streamlining the committees and bringing more discussion to the full authority. The Executive Committee is typically, I'm suggesting that moving forward, it would be the chair, vice chair, and past chair. And then opening membership up to that committee to 2 members to be elected at the first meeting of the authority every year. So again, more participation in that committee from the full board. And again, just noting that all offices would be elected at the first meeting of the year. Bylaw review, I think this is important to have in there. It was included in the model that we'd be looking at bylaw review. I'm suggesting every 5 years. And I think that's a good rotation in terms of the municipal elections, so bringing new members on, looking at the bylaw and making sure that they're comfortable with it and moving forward. And 2/3 majority is required, and that's to make changes to the bylaw, and that's in keeping with our current policies. Notice of meetings would continue to be getting the agendas out 5 days in advance of the regular meetings, and special meetings would require 72 hours notice, again, mainly in keeping with how we're currently operating. Quorum was one deviation from the model. Currently, quorum for this board is 50% plus 1, and I'm suggesting that we keep it with that. It makes it clear that we're looking for a majority of the board to be here in place to have quorum. Attendance, a clause on attendance was added, so if an appointed member misses 3 meetings, that notice would be provided to the municipality that there's a noticeable absence from them at the board. Delegations, I'm suggesting some changes there as well. So the proposed admin bylaw would provide the ability for delegations who haven't provided written notice 10 days prior to a meeting. If they provide notice the Monday prior to the meeting on an item to be discussed on the agenda, and 2/3 of the members present so move, that individual would be able to appear in front of the board. So if they they don't get their delegation request in 10 days prior to the meeting, they get the agenda 5 days prior to the meeting, they see that there's something on the agenda that they wish to speak to, that they feel important, they can provide notice to the office the Monday prior to the meeting. And I would notify the chair of that, and the board would consider that request at the meeting and allow or not allow them to speak at the meeting. If it was not allowed, they could move on to the next meeting agenda. It also, for the new proposed bylaw also provides on some guidance to the board on how to deal with a delegation after it's been heard. So it provides for the fact that the board could deal immediately with the request of the delegation, request a report from staff, or refer the matter to another meeting. So again, just provides a little more guidance to the delegation policy that we've had in the past. Notice of motion would require to be filed 7 days prior to a meeting rather than the current 36 hours prior. And that was just a suggestion based on what I was seeing as standard operating procedures from other bylaws. A motion to reconsider after a question has been decided, any member who voted thereof with the majority may at the next regular meeting of the authority move for reconsideration. And I believe that's in keeping with our current policy as well. One nice thing that I think is a big win and benefit in looking at the proposed template that was forwarded by Conservation Ontario is the inclusion of a code of conduct. It's something that this board was missing. I think it's a good value add to adopt with the bylaw. Similarly, the conflict of interest would be included now as well. Again, both of those documents being based on what Conservation Ontario had developed looking at best management practices throughout the province. And finally, included at the end is the terms of reference, which is mandatory for any committee. And again, you'll notice that there wasn't a terms of reference included for personnel, planning, or nominating committee. So I'm suggesting that they would no longer be standing committees of the authority. The only one would be the executive, and again, it would be a 5-member committee, 3 by virtue of their position, and 2 others elected from the general membership. So what I am requesting, and again, this is, there's a lot of material to go over there. It has been both the model template as well as my recommended proposed bylaw has been reviewed by your solicitor, and he provided comments and recommended that I bring it forward for your consideration today. I am asking that if you have concerns or questions or wish to sit down and talk to me about any elements of that bylaw, that if we could possibly do it by August 31st, that provides me enough time to consider those changes or make any changes that you wish, so that we can bring it back to the September meeting for full consideration.
Questions, comments, Marcel?
How did you know? Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple, and I don't know whether we want to talk about some changes now or whether we just want to write all of them down and talk about them on September, but a couple I've noticed. The bylaw changes that we want, or bylaw review every 5 years. Really, it probably should be every 4 years. It should be consecutive with the terms of office, so that every term of changing a new board gets dealt with. And so if it was on a 4-year basis, it would follow the election process of municipal government. And this is maybe not a question for our bylaw, but because of our board is 10, and I've always asked, why is it 10, not an odd number? Is there any logical reason why we're 10, not an odd number?
It's based on the population that we have within the watershed and what population you have in your municipality in the watershed. So it's not like we chose 10 members arbitrarily, it is based on the
When was that done? When was the 10-member created? Because the populations have changed. Just wondering if that maybe should be looked at. So just, and that may not be part of this review, but I just saw it as a thing. The 3 meetings that you have, it probably should be 3 months. Because if we may have a special meeting to cause 2 meetings in 1 month.
3 regular meetings maybe?
But it didn't say regular, just.
No, that's what I'm
three.
just suggesting, maybe that's what it is, 3 regular meetings, where we've got the, under attendance. So if they miss 3 meetings, we
Oh,
would notify, so
okay.
maybe 3 regular meetings. Yeah, don't include special meetings in that.
Right.
Consecutive, yeah, maybe more consecutive. You miss January, and then June.
That's where it is for.
So 3 consecutive regular meetings.
Yeah.
Miss three,
Okay.
you're back to 1, then you miss 3 more.
That's fine. It's odd, but,
Municipal activities.
Yeah, that's what ours is, under
Yeah.
municipal, yeah.
3 consecutive.
Yeah,
right, but regular meetings, not, because we could have
Yeah.
special meetings, some unfair, but we just do. The notice of motion, I'm not clear on that because of, and maybe it's just I'm not remembering process, but I thought that you bring a notice of motion to the agenda, after which at the following meeting it can be considered. So I don't know why it requires 7 days prior to be filed, because of, unless I'm understanding the process incorrectly, a notice of motion, if a member wants to bring something to the table, they bring a notice of motion. That notice of motion is presented at the one meeting, at the following meeting, it's dealt with. I don't know why it needs 7 days prior for that to happen. Can someone help me?
My understanding on that is very similar to what you're saying. The only difference would be is that you can bring a notice of motion to the board. The board can decide to deal with it right there and then, if they so wish, depending on the urgency. Or they get it, if the board does not want to deal with it, then it does go to the next meeting.
So to that point, my understanding is that it takes the majority of council to accept that notice of motion at that
at
day.
that time.
And so I don't know why we need 7 days prior for a notice of motion to come to the floor. Because a notice of motion is just that, a notice of a motion. It shouldn't take 7 days to 7 days prior for that. And so that's just my governance thinking. I may be missing something, but just a point. Those are my points, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, I can investigate the notice of motion. The template does speak to that's typically 7 business days, but I can do some research into why they're choosing 7 days, or if there's a difference as you suggest. I can make the change to 3 consecutive regular meetings in the absence category. But I would like suggestion, while I have all the members here, whether or not they want the 5-year review or a 4-year review. I don't.
Dave?
I would agree with Marcel, it's that every time you have a new board, that would be an opportune time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could have literally a board go through and never review in their term. So it makes sense it would be in a 4-year cycle. And you wouldn't necessarily do it in the first year. Quite often you alternate it so that it's,
Staggered.
you're staggered, so it's like in the second year of your term, so that you have a better understanding on the dealings of the board. Typically at the municipal level, that's when we're reviewing things, we try to do that, so it's the middle of term. Gives you the opportunity for a brand new member to have a better understanding. So I would suggest that the 4 years and probably alternate in the middle of the term. And one other thing on there is I think we're talking about what we're used to under the Municipal Act. This is the Conservation Act, so there could be some differences there. I'm just, and so we're used to the Municipal Act and how we have to do certain things, so that would be interesting to see if that's the difference.
Stephen?
I was just going to comment that it shouldn't be the first year.
Yeah, no, not no first year. Don't try
I would
that.
suggest either the third year as opposed to the first or second.
Any further comments on that? 4 years, I think 4 years is probably a better review period. Was 5 suggested by?
I can't find it in my head.
Oh, there's
Okay. Marcel, go
Madam Chair, with the motion to reconsider, after a question has been decided, any member who voted thereof with the majority at the next regular meeting of the authority may move for reconsideration. I'd have to look at notes, but somewhere in motion to reconsider, I believe there's 2/3 required.
Under the municipal.
And I think it would be appropriate.
I think that, yeah, 2/3 have to then vote in favor.
To
To
have it
reconsider, to
considered,
reconsider.
reconsider.
Yeah, that's in
And
there.
it just says majority there.
It should be 2/3 of the whole council,
Yes,
or 2/3 of those who voted in favor.
2/3 of council.
Isn't the mover and seconder, they're both involved in that?
Yes, no, it's the mover that has to be a person that was in favor of the decision, and then it requires 2/3 of council, from my recollection.
Something that should be reviewed,
Yes.
Yeah,
that
just,
should be heard.
yeah,
So the proposed bylaws, if a motion is made to reconsider a previous motion, a 2/3 majority vote shall be required in order for reconsideration to take place.
Thank you.
yeah, that's in there. I thought I read that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It just goes-
Yeah, and the short form that she's given us there now, it's, but in the actual, where it is in there, yeah. Was there anything else that jumped out at you that, right now, that you wanted
I'll send
to comment on, or?
Send me your notes.
If not, if you think of something later, make sure we send it into Elizabeth so we can get that.
A long drive to Ottawa, yeah, a lot of time.
Why not thought of that? All right, so
There was a.
there is a recommendation.
Motion there that,
Let me go back to you.
that the proposed administrative bylaw be received for consideration at September 19th full authority meeting.
Stephen, you moving that? All right, give it a second. Bill? All in favor? And that's carried.
Madam Chair, could we possibly have the old policy be sent to
I
us?
posted it yesterday to the internal.
Good, thank you.
Okay. We will look at that in September again. So, next item is our personnel policy. Anybody who's electronically looking at page 912.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, the proposed personnel policy was presented to the Personnel and Finance Committee at its May 11th meeting and was subsequently reviewed by the staff over the summer. It's based on models from other conservation authorities as well as some of the local municipalities. As per the updated policy, once approved by the Board of Directors and suggesting that it would be posted for 1 month and implemented beginning September 16th of 2018. Moving forward, the policies would be reviewed at least once every 3 years. So again, establishing right into the policy our review schedule. So again, just to take you through some highlights of it or more significant changes or additions. In terms of the hiring and recruitment, that there would no longer be a prohibition against hiring relatives who are qualified candidates, except that immediate family shall not be employed in a direct employee-supervisor relationship. And I believe that the policy also states that it needs to be declared to the selection committee as well. Hiring of contract or seasonal staff with unbudgeted expenditures over $10,000 must be approved by the full authority. So again, just opening it up for management to be able to make some seasonal hiring as per budget availability, and provides for procedures for internal postings or reassignments. So quite often we'll have a seasonal or contract position come open where an existing contract is ending, and if that person is in good standing, we could make that position available to them first before opening it up to the public. Criminal record checks, again, this is one of the policies that was a standalone policy outside the personnel policy, and recommending it, bringing it in. The only change to this policy would be that the introduction of attestation that the record check originally submitted is still valid. So what we're running into, especially for some returning staff, it takes a long time for them to get the criminal record check. And so if we can have this attestation, it's something that's been used with the school boards as well. You simply sign a paper saying there's been no change since the last one that you submitted with us, with this authority. Leaves of absences, there was a number of additions or changes under this category. The biggest one was providing for the personal emergency leave days. So this is as a result of Bill 148, providing all employees 10 personal emergency leave days. So we've added the procedure in for those. In terms of bereavement for full-time permanent staff, we've expanded it from 3 for immediate family to 5 for immediate family, 3 for in-laws, including grandparents and grandchildren, and 2 for sister and brother-in-laws. It also provides for special leaves to be approved by the board of directors. So I believe there was some discussion at the personnel committee about affording the board, so say as a staff member, their house burnt down or something like that, but there is a little bit of leniency there for the board to consider some special circumstances. And that sick days must be used in half or full days, not hours. And so that's in keeping, again, with this idea of personal emergency leave days, that they have to be full days. In terms of employee benefits, it provides more clarity as to when health coverage ends upon retirement, and establishes a 2-year maximum in the case of absence from work on an approved medical leave. So it clearly states those 2 scenarios in the policy. The hours of work, according to the existing policy, there's 2 categories of employees at the authority, one working 40 hours and one working 37 and a half. We're introducing the standard 37.5-hour work week for all employees. Designated holidays was suggested that December 24th be added as a designated holiday, and further noting within that policy that the office is officially closed from December 24th to January 1st, with time required that isn't a designated holiday in that period be accounted for with overtime and or vacation. So that's typically something that we go to the board every year and ask permission for. This would be building it right into the policy. Not a lot of changes to vacation. I think the vacation schedule remains the same. It does limit the amount that can be accumulated from year to year, and clarifies that vacation accumulation continues during protected leave, such as the maternity leave. That's in keeping with statutory requirements. And it formalizes some unwritten policies. So I have basically an unwritten policy at the authority right now that no more than 2 permanent staff can be off vacation at the same time for a week or more. So just to ensure that we have proper coverage at the authority at all times. And so that was formalized into the written policy as well. Misconduct and discipline policy, this is another policy that existed on its own, and we're bringing it into the personal policy here now. The only change to that policy would be noting that seasonal staff be allowed to access KCCA property while off duty, but not to their assigned campground. So the existing policy restricts seasonal staff from accessing a KCCA policy at all during their off time, and now we're changing it to simply the campground that they're assigned to. Expenses and travel, it provides for more guidance in terms of acceptable meal allowances, so it provides an actual dollar amount in terms of what's acceptable for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that the authority may deny employment or use of a company vehicle if an employee has more than 5 demerit points. So we always ask for a driver's abstract, but there's little guidance to say what happens when we get a poor driver's abstract. So this provides some guidance around that as well.
Ralph?
Yeah, just ask a question to you that provides for some guidance in terms of acceptable meal allowance. In other words, you're going to say $2 for breakfast and $5 for lunch, that sort of thing?
Yes.
I worked under that once, and that is a terrible thing to impose upon any employee, where you say that they can only, because if you're on the road somewhere, you can't always buy breakfast for $5.
Right. So
Or any other meal.
I appreciate that. The actual wording in the policy says that the following should be used as a guideline noting that taxes and gratuities are not included in the meal rate. But quite often I get, what is it kind of an acceptable realm? And so it's, again, very much related to a guideline and was based on some other things that I saw with ministry.
Marcel?
While we're asking questions, Madam Chair, through you, the travel expense, the 5 demerit points, is there a specific reason you chose 5 versus 6?
Joe did the research on that, and I believe that that was the threshold between them having their license.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Chair, once you get 5 demerit points, that sets up the likelihood of potential loss of license. It doesn't guarantee the loss, but the next incident or with 5 demerit points could lose your license.
So there's 2 parts of that. I really, in my own mind, think it should be more than 6, not 5, but there should be. So, yeah, somehow, I guess, let me think about that. I'll comment later.
Before we go off that one, Dave, do you?
So if I
Yeah.
we're just listening on that. Looking at that, it is 6 for like long-time driver's license, and full G2.
Exactly.
It's 5 for new, within a certain time frame for new drivers. And I think part of the reason for 5 was because of our seasonal staff scenario. When we hire students to work on our campgrounds, they are driving our vehicles. So 5 is the cutoff for the classification.
So, through you, Madam Chair, my thinking started with longtime employees for very unfortunate situations could see themselves with 6 demerit points. Would that mean they could no longer drive our vehicles? So, I think maybe it should be 2 category then, because of, not that I wish anyone many demerit point losses, but, 6 is not that unreasonable.
So, Madam Chair, the exact wording in the policy is that the authority may deny employment or the use of an authority vehicle if the driver in question is more than 5 demerit points. So it's not cut in stone, but again, it's may, it's not shall.
That's a slippery one too. But yes, let me give it more thought.
Dave, did you have a comment?
No, I was just pointing out what Elizabeth said, that it's me.
Yeah.
It really what it does is it brings attention to your supervisor or whoever's managing that particular person, that there could be an issue here, and it gives you the opportunity to have that discussion. Because if you don't, and if you have another demerit point, MTO is going to have that discussion with you.
Through you, Madam Chair, then write that into the policy.
It says me. So you have that discussion.
Stephen?
Just a question, is this self-disclosure or?
We do ask for.
So as a condition of employment, we ask for a driver's abstract,
Every 3.
for a driver's abstract.
How often do we get a driver's abstract?
Only at the beginning of employment.
So I'm great when I start. No, seriously,
No, I
I'm
know.
quite serious,
I
right? Because MTO is not obligated to fill us in on any demerit points that anyone gets.
No.
So it's self-disclosure. Geez, boss, you know what, I got another speeding ticket. I'm just wondering whether
These are
there's.
under conditions for employment, right?
Hiring.
For
Hiring,
Oh,
yeah, this is
okay.
under the hiring part, right?
Okay, good, not for continuing,
Yeah,
right?
I guess what I'm just,
You see, like, I
No, I know.
guess I'm just a little bit confused, that's all.
No, I didn't interpret
We're
it.
talking about seasonal staff versus long-term staff.
Yeah, so seasonal staff as well, as a condition of their employment, have to submit a driver's abstract.
Right,
And at that time is when we review the demerit points
okay.
as a due diligence as to whether or not we want to allow them on our insurance for
Right.
driving their vehicles,
Completely understandable, I understand.
right? So at that time is where we would have that decision. Is it, we want to hire them, but they can't drive our vehicles? Or it's so high, or because of the type of position that we're hiring them for, we simply can't take them on as an employee.
But to go back to Marcel's point, 5 needs to be the lower threshold and not 6. And it's not an unfortunate incident, that you have 60 merit points and then are applying for a job with our organization,
Um,
right?
Through you, Madam Chair, the way I read the travel and expense portion, it just says use of authority vehicles, employees, not new employees, employees in the service of the authority whose duty requires them to drive or have charge of any authority vehicle shall, and it goes on. I don't think.
Shall submit an acceptable driver's abstract as a condition of employment. The authority may deny employment or the use of an authority vehicle if the driver in question is more than 5 demerit points.
I missed that, okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, what happens the second year you hire the same underage student or underage in terms of not long-term employment, for seasonal employment, you hire them again next year?
It's a new contract, they would submit a new driver's abstract.
Do what they are required to, okay.
Okay, other comments on this section? No? Okay, we'll move on.
Hold on, there's more sections.
I know, we'll move on.
Recognition, so not a lot of changes on the recognition of employees or board members, except that I didn't go beyond 30 years in terms of recognition. After 30 years, it was upon retirement that we would be providing them with recognition of $300, provided that they had a minimum of 10 years service with the authority. And again, just noting that the policies, a number of them were standalone policies that are now incorporated into the complete personnel policy document. I think I've already highlighted those, but just being the criminal record check, the misconduct and discipline policy, and the conflict and issue recognition were all existing, that are just kind of brought into the heading of personnel policy.
Any further comments, discussion? So there were a couple of areas that we were discussing that I think we probably need to provide further clarification before we, so the recommendation is to approve this and that be implemented starting in September. So, oops. Marcel?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ralph's comment of value of meals. Really all that's saying is that if you find some very expensive place for breakfast, dinner, or lunch, that you're going to supplement some of that meal yourself.
Well, yes, except, pardon me, if you were asked to travel on Sunday afternoon to Eastern Ontario, which is what I used to get caught up in, and they had set the limit at $6 or whatever it was for dinner, you can't buy a dinner for $6. And it was damn frustrating.
Yeah. I know, and I've seen in other policies too, that the total allowance for the day is this, and it can be, so breakfast and lunch is less, then you have that little bit more for dinner, or you can use a little more for some of that for, but the total for the day should not exceed this recommended amount. Yeah, it's a guideline to be used, as it states, it's a guideline. I think common sense prevails, we're not, yeah.
That's right, I agree, but I say these were
Yeah.
enforced, and it was very, you had your
I can
cheat,
imagine.
you had your rubber boot.
I can imagine.
Through you, Madam Chair, just one comment on the clothing. Is that for all seasonal staff, so that would be gate staff, maintenance workers? I'm just looking for 2 t-shirts. The 2 shirts might be fine for the gate staff, but if someone's out there cutting grass and weeding all day, they're gonna go through 2 shirts in a day maybe. Is that the same for everybody, or is that?
So, Madam Chair, Joe might want to chime on this one, but this was one that we had some discussion on with the field staff as well. Right now, we require seasonal staff to purchase their t-shirts. And so what we find is that they might get 1 or 2, maybe 1, and try to really cycle that throughout the summer, so that, you know, if you are one of the more field staffs of the seasonal, those t-shirts can look pretty
Pretty rough.
by the end of the year, but reasonably they're students and money is tight, so we thought that offering up the authority providing them two t-shirts, and if they wanted to purchase one beyond that, they, that would be up to them, but at least we're helping them out because we do want them to look a certain standard, and if we want that we should, I believe, provide that.
Are there any other areas we were talking about?
I had just noted the meal expense, and I hope that based on that it's a guideline would address Ralph's concern. And then the only other element I heard was the driver's abstract, and I think through discussion that everyone is moderately happy with that.
Moderately.
I'll do this.
I think it's just clarification on it.
Okay.
But you have to, I think self-disclosure is an issue for a long-term employee.
Yeah, we've never gotten into a scenario where we're asking permanent staff to provide, an updated driver's abstract beyond the original one. And I'm certainly not suggesting that in this policy, but.
I mean, if you're driving a company vehicle here and you're in a 6 or 7 point category and haven't told anybody because you're not required to, what's the impact if there's an accident and you're responsible for causing that accident with regard to our insurance?
I can ask the insurance company that. I did ask them to review the requirement for the 5 demerit points. They didn't have any other guidance to say, other than to say that that was a due diligence measure. It really is up to the authority as to who they are going to allow to drive their vehicles, because we do submit both a copy of the license as well as the driver's abstract to the insurance company. But again, it's really up to the authority as to who we allow to drive our vehicles.
Maybe worth checking to see if there's a potential concern there. That's really all I'm saying at this point. I don't think there is, but
I can, if there's concerns about that and the demerit points, and I guess what I'm hearing is the question more that you're concerned about long-term employees, you wish them to disclose a driver's abstract, or you don't want that? I guess I'm a little confused as to what direction you want that to take.
You might want to put a line in there that says upon employment, initial employment, as opposed to during continued employment.
Yeah, it does, it says,
That's.
Is that what it says?
it says, yeah, as a condition of employment.
Okay, so as long as it's specific,
Yeah,
then you're safe, but
It's very ambiguous, because I could read that as,
I'm just,
as any time we ask, because it's a condition of employment, to keep being employed here, you need to provide us.
well, I'm thinking of the other world that I live in right now,
Yes.
right? I could be out there getting demerit points all the time and they would never know,
yeah.
right? And so, when you bring that topic up, you have to be fairly clear as far as when you're expecting it and when you're expecting it, I would think, anyway.
So this is, under this to me is when we're offering them employment.
And I would suggest
So
that
we
your
want to
insurer would be
add
the
that.
ones who would dictate exactly what those conditions would be, right?
that's right.
I can look at that wording again, and then we'll touch base with the insurance company. But again, what I've heard from the insurance company before is it's up to the authority to dictate, again, the conditions of employment and who they allow to drive our vehicles. So they reviewed this terminology, and they thought it was a good due diligence measures, but they really don't have, I will double check with them, but they really didn't have any guidance as to whether it's a condition of employment or how often you would check up on them.
And the other thing is, of course, we're not an island, and so we have other CAs out there and
Yeah.
other organizations who have people driving company. You know, what is their process? And just go.
At the end of the day, my question really is, why wouldn't we want safe drivers driving our vehicles?
Right.
Could be conditional offer of employment, right? Yeah, because that's what we're talking about in this policy, right?
If submit an acceptable driver's abstract as a condition at the initial.
Yeah.
Initial,
Yeah,
I can work with the wording.
get the wording right. Okay. All right, any other ones? So we've got this, recommendation is that we approve this, or I forgot to write page one.
The recommendation was that you that the personnel policy be approved as presented and implemented beginning September 16th, 2018.
So do we want it as amended? Our next meeting's the 19th, so the intent was to get this in place before then, but do we want to wait till the 19th and then approve it for effective after that?
Well, I think certainly on the issue we've spoken about, I think there's some clarity that needs following.
Okay, so we can do that. So recommendation that we will bring this forward, I think we just bring this back at our September meeting with clarification. We don't need a, I don't need a motion at this point. But we can bring that back as well at our September meeting with clarification on those couple items. Okay. I think that brings us up to our planning and regulations report. That was there, included in advance, lots happening, it's that time of year. Anything to add, Joe? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, nothing really to draw any attention to unless there's questions of the members.
Any questions on any of those from there? Do we get mover and seconder to receive that? It's Max and Ralph. All in favor? That's carried. All right, so next we've got closed session. If there's nothing further for open, make a motion to go in closed session. We've got Dave and Stephen. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, so we've got minutes from the in-camera meeting on June 27th. Can I get a mover and seconder for those minutes, please? We got Stephen and Bill. All in favor? So carried. All right, recommendations. You want to?
To proceed as directed on section 28 violation.
Both of them? Sorry.
First one.
Just the first one? Okay, so proceed as directed, noting the conflict. Can I get a mover and seconder? Dave, Marcel, all in favor? It's carried. Proceed,
On item C, if we could proceed as directed on matters affecting notice violation B18-003, and further that notice of violation B18-004 be revoked.
Ralph
I'll move.
and Dave, all in favor? That's carried. And then
And proceed as directed.
proceed as directed for item, Bill and Max. Sure. All in favor? That's carried. Motion to adjourn? Unless you want to keep